Hi and welcome. We're going to start this SSIS class by looking at Module 1. Module 1 is going to focus in on an overview of integration services, the main topic of this class. And what we're going to look at in this module is, first of all, why would you use SSIS? Okay, so what's kind of the reasoning behind using the tool? It's always good to know before you jump into a new technology. We're also going to look at some common use cases for SSIS. So not only will you have the why, but also some scenarios on when you would use it. And then we'll look at who would use it. So which people would really best fit using integration services. All right, so let's get started. So when you're developing integration service packages or SSIS packages, and we'll talk about what a package is as we get going here, but you're really doing that for the purposes of creating a ETL process. You'll hear this term used a lot in relation to SSIS. Now, oftentimes you might actually develop SSIS that doesn't completely fit all of these letters as part of the acronym here, but let's talk about them because this is generally what people are talking about when they say SSIS. What ETL stands for is extract, transform, and load. So it means I'm going to extract data out of some source, and you can see from the image I have on the screen here, you could have one source, you could have multiple sources that you're going to extract data out of. Then you're going to transform that data, also known, what a lot of people like to refer to it as applying business rules to the data, before you finally go load it into your final destination. So a common scenario for this, as you kind of see in my screenshot here, is I have multiple types of data sources. I might have an Oracle database, a SQL database, a DB2 data source, all of them used for different parts of my business. And I'm going to use SSIS to extract the data out of those different data sources, transform them so that I can apply the business rules that are required for reporting purposes, eventually for reporting, and then I'm going to load it into a centralized database, perhaps a data warehouse. So I'm going through this ETL step here, this extract, transform, and load, to prepare the data for eventually being reported on or for analytics in something like an analysis services cube. So that's what the whole idea behind ETL is. You'll hear that term often in relation to data extraction tools like SSIS. Now, why would you use SSIS? We kind of gave you a good idea there to start off with, but there's really even more reasons than that. Certainly, it's great at integrating in multiple data sources. I kind of gave you a similar example to what you see on the screen now. You have a SQL Server source, DB2, Oracle, CSV. You have all of these different source systems that are available, and you really need to get information from all four of them, right? One of them is not going to give you everything you need, but if you can get all four of these together and pull them together into a centralized database like a data warehouse, then you could really start to make decisions off of your data. And that's what SSIS is going to help you do. It's going to be great at integrating in those different data sources. It has built into it multiple types of data source types. So whether you need to go to SQL Server or Oracle, you can easily connect to that data and pull it into the appropriate location. It also is data warehouse ready. And what I mean by data warehouse ready is it has many tasks and components that are built into the tool that are designed so that you can actually build out and load a data warehouse. Things like the slowly changing dimension that are built into the tool, into SSIS, are there to help you load dimension tables for a data warehouse. You'll also find that it has some capabilities for data cleansing. And what you can do with this is you can actually use SSIS for cleansing your data as it comes in from the sources. So if you have data that you anticipate being incorrect or bad, I'm sure many of you have experienced bad data coming from your sources. You can then use SSIS as a way for cleansing that data before you pull it and bring it into your data warehouse, or it doesn't even have to be a data warehouse. It could just be some staging environment that you have for your data. So it has some components built into it for data cleansing. These are ones like the data quality services transform. You also have things like derived column and lookup, and all these different transforms that are built inside of the data flow that we'll get to in this course will help you with cleansing the data as it comes in. Now here's some common SSIS use case scenarios, and I think this is kind of helpful because it gives you an idea of when you would actually, or maybe some scenarios that you're actually doing at your work, that you would use SSIS for, and we'll kind of talk about the different components that would be useful in these. All right, so here's your first scenario. I need to load a data warehouse dimension table without duplicating data each time I run it. So I need to be able to run the same package multiple times basically here, and I don't want that same data to get loaded each time I run it. So I want to make sure that I have some kind of a process to make sure that duplicate data does not get loaded. Well, SSIS can solve this problem, and it can do it through a tool I already mentioned briefly inside the SSIS data flow called the slowly changing dimension transform. And that slowly changing dimension transform will actually look at new rows that are coming in from your source and check and see, have those rows already been inserted into the destination? If they've already been inserted into the destination, then it does not attempt to load them a second time. It just sends those rows off into another output if you wanted to. So there's some built-in functionality for data warehousing here, you see. All right, the next scenario I have for you here is going to be I need to download and load from an FTP server. So it should be say and FTP server there. So I need to download and load files from an FTP server. Well, you do have some FTP solutions or FTP components built in. There's an FTP task that will help you download or upload files from an FTP server. And you can then place them into your data flow. The results of that can go into a data flow, and then you can load that data into a table. Another scenario here. Let's talk about this one. This has to do with data quality. I have data quality problems when loading my state data from customers. I have my data looks like this in parentheses here. Sometimes it comes in as FL, sometimes it comes in as FLA, sometimes it comes through and it spells out Florida. And I need some way to be able to merge those records together and make sure that I'm only showing one version of that data. Well, in this case, it's actually going to be something you can use for like a data quality DQS transform inside of SSIS and inside the data flow. That's going to help you and allow you to do some data cleansing. Now, there's some other ways that you can solve that problem as well. And just like other technologies that you've probably worked with in the past, there's about a half a dozen ways that you can solve each of these problems. I'm just giving you some of the ways that you could here listed as possible solutions. All right, so those are some different scenarios that you have available to you. The next thing we're going to talk about here are some of the different roles that you have within the world of BI. So if you're working in business intelligence, you have a lot of different roles that you could fit into. You have an ETL developer. We talked a little about ETL earlier. You have a cube developer, and the role of that cube developer is to take data from a data warehouse and bring it into an analysis services cube. And you also have things like a report developer. A report developer is going to take the final prepared data and be able to visualize it into some kind of a reporting tool. Microsoft has a lot of different reporting tools. And then you also often will have what's known as a data warehouse architect. An architect, or a BI architect, really knows a little, and I shouldn't say a little bit, they know a lot about all of these different technologies. They know a lot about integration services, they know a lot about analysis services and reporting services and other reporting tools, so that they kind of have a big picture of how everything works and how everything fits together. And they can really play the role of any of these above. Now, speaking of that, this is really important to know as well, is how does all this stuff fit together? Okay, if you're new to the BI world, then you're probably just learning about integration services, and maybe you're new to reporting services and analysis services, so it's good to know how does the Microsoft BI ecosystem fit together. Okay, so let's actually draw that out a little bit here. I'm going to draw this on the screen here with a little whiteboard session. So we've talked about SSIS briefly here to start off. We said that a great scenario for SSIS is taking multiple data sources that you have. So let's imagine that we have multiple data sources over here with data that we may want to use for loading into perhaps a data warehouse, but it doesn't have to be a data warehouse. So let's say one of these is SQL Server. Okay, one of these might be DB2. Okay, DB2. There we go. And one of these maybe is Oracle here. Just do an abbreviation for Oracle. Okay. All right. So I have these different data sources available to me. And again, there's reasons why you have these different data sources. Maybe you have different vendor applications. Maybe your SQL Server database is your sales data. And maybe DB2 stores in it your inventory data. And Oracle has in it your HR data. So you have all these different subsystems for a reason. But if you really want to be able to analyze across all systems, you would need to take that data and pull it out and bring it into some kind of a database that's structured in a way to handle all that data. And these lines that I have here that are pulling the data out of the sources, keep in mind these are my data sources. Okay, so these are data sources here. And I'm pulling them into some kind of central location. Now, depending on what you like to do, some folks actually like to do more of a ELT approach rather than an ETL approach. There's really two approaches to loading data here. You could choose to take data out, transform it, and load it into a data warehouse. That's one method. That's the ETL approach. Or some actually like to do an ELT approach. And what an ELT approach says is take the data out of the source still, but I want to just load it and stage it in some kind of environment. So it's basically trying to get that data out of the source systems as fast as possible without trying to do any extra transforms on it before it lands into the data source. So that approach is often done when you have very large data sets where you just want to get the data off of that subsystem. You want to get it off of there and into another system that maybe isn't as taxed throughout the day with user entries and things like that. Both approaches have good arguments to using them. There's not really a right or wrong way. You'll kind of have your favorite as you work through and use these different technologies. But let's just stick with the idea here of what we talked about so far of being more the ETL approach. So the ETL approach says that I'm going to take my data out of my data source. I'm going to load it into, let's say for this example, a data warehouse, and we'll pretend it's a SQL Server one. Doesn't have to be SQL Server, but it is in this case. Okay, so I'm going to take my data out of these sources. I'll box these off so these are my sources. Send them into my data warehouse, and these lines here represent the SSIS processing here. So this is actually integration services here, or SSIS, taking the data out of the source, transforming it, and loading it into my data warehouse. So this picture that we see right here, this overall picture that I've just boxed off, this is all done using SSIS. Take data out of one spot, transform it, and load it is going to be done using SSIS. So this whole picture here is SSIS. Now, beyond SSIS, I can now take this data that I have in my data warehouse and pull it into more of an analytical layer. And with the Microsoft BI stack, you actually have a couple options here. Now, this is kind of outside the scope of an SSIS class, but again, it's good to know kind of grand scheme of how all these things fit together. So beyond integration services, I can take my data that I have in a data warehouse and bring it into something that's called an analysis services cube. Okay, so I'm going to draw out a little cube here just so you can kind of visualize that it is a different type of database. And it's more of a database designed for analytical processing. It's much faster at returning back data because it does pre-aggregated data, but it's done in a way that it can make it much easier for users to connect to. It's all users are going to connect to a cube using Excel. So you have a couple routes. You can either choose to do, really this is all going to be analysis services that I show here. Okay, so this is SSIS. Okay, you have two types of SSIS you can choose from. This one's known as a multi-dimensional analysis services cube. Okay, that's one route. Or you could also choose a new path that Microsoft has. It came out in SQL Server 2012, which is known as Analysis Services Tabular. It's an in-memory technology that they've developed that's very similar to an Excel technology called Power Pivot, but it's for a server, so it scales a little better. So this guy came out in SQL Server 2012. Multidimensional cubes have been around for quite a bit longer. But again, it shows you here how these things fit together. I can take my data warehouse, pull that data into a multidimensional cube or a tabular model. In fact, tabular models actually don't even require you to have a data warehouse. I could go directly to the data sources. But once I have that analytical layer, I can then place on top of that even my reporting layer. And I'm going to call this SSRS, but really the reporting layer can be much, much wider than just reporting services. Reporting services is certainly one form of visualizing your data. Okay, so this will be my report. Okay, my report server. And I can report on my data either from multidimensional cubes or from tabular, or even all the way back to the SQL Server databases I have in Oracle and DB2. I can use reporting services off of as well. But I can take, if you want to follow the whole scheme of how BI works, I'm going to take my data that I have in analysis services, bring it into a reporting services report so I can visualize that data. Now, reporting services is just one way Microsoft has for visualizing data. You can actually have several others as well, just to list them off briefly because I know that's not the focus of this class. You have technologies like Power View. You can certainly use Excel. You could also use Performance Point. It's part of SharePoint. And Power Pivot is part of Excel as well, but you have other ones as well, like Power Map if you have geographical data. So there's a lot of ways that you can visualize data inside of the Microsoft stack, and you kind of get to choose which one makes the most sense. And we have other classes that we devote time discussing that, but just be aware of you have a lot of things going on here. Now, for the focus of our class, integration services, what we're going to do in the next set of modules is actually get you familiar. Now that you have an idea of what it's for, we're going to get you familiar with the development environment and some of the terminology that's going to be really important for you to know for doing integration services packages. And we'll do that next.